Hi, I'm Pat McAndrew with All About Solo, and today we are interviewing Janis Brenner.
You make me
Janis Brenner has been known worldwide as a quadruple threat, as a choreographer, a dancer, a vocalist, and a teacher who has toured 36 countries, is on the faculty at the Juilliard School, and has won Best Choreography for the 2017 United Solo Theater Festival show of Eden Transplanted by Eva Petric. And we are very excited to have her here with us today at Theater Row in New York City. So I guess my first question to you, Janis, is how did you stumble upon solo performance? How did you get involved into this art form?
I danced in a company called Murray Lewis Dance Company for many years, from the late 70s to the mid 80s. And Murray Lewis had featured me in many of his works, making solos for me as a dancer. And some of his work was also pretty theatrical. So they were sometimes character driven as well. Not pure acting, but theater dance pieces. So I had kind of developed a kinship with solos through Murray Lewis. And when I left his company, and I hadn't been singing for quite a while, because in a major dance company, when you're on tour, it's very hard to keep up your vocal work amongst dancers who are wondering why you're off in the corner going me, 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 when, you know, that's not in the work. So when I left his company, I was very hungry to go back to my vocal work as well, and so I started making solos for myself that incorporated some vocal work, some theater aspects, but mostly dance movement-driven solos. And in the mid to late 80s, into the 90s, I toured a solo show of just short dance pieces that had historical significance, like where my lineage had come from, where Murray Lewis had worked, and back to Alwyn Nicolai, and to Hanya Holm, and to Rudolf von Laban in Germany. And so I started to perform historical works, and the second half of my solo show was my own work. And I was traipsing around the world, like with my enormous suitcase and set piece in it, and it was very rewarding and really a tour de force to perform like 7 to 8 different short solos and kind of transform internally into what each solo was saying. But by the early 90s, I got really lonely and on the road, and I needed to be back in a studio with other like-minded dancers, and I formed a dance company in the late 80s in order to kind of have that camaraderie of making work together. So I've just come back to really this solo form because I was invited by the festival to make a work. And so this is the first, it's actually the first full-length 45-minute solo that I've ever made.
Wow.
Or ever done. So yeah, it's really exciting and kind of also wonderfully scary, but to incorporate all of my loves: theater, voice, and movement.
don't shuffle, don't shuffle, shuffle, shuffle,
And you have such an extensive background as a dancer and a long history of working with Meredith Monk as a vocalist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm curious, how do you fuse all of that experience into your solo work?
It's been an interesting journey, because when you're a dancer and you have a dance company, bookers and presenters and producers, they kind of want to put you in a box so that they can sell you or promote you, and a dance company is usually a dance company, and people dance, including the artistic director sometimes. But since I also had this other major force and love in my life, which was singing, which I've had since I was a child, it's been kind of a double-edged sword to work in the music and vocal world and also have a dance company. And I think these days it's much more open to what we call interdisciplinary artists and multidisciplinary forms merging. There's so many more artists who are working this way. So that makes me happy.
I'm curious too, if you could tell us a little bit about your solo performance, Inheritance, a Litany. Just given this multidisciplinary track that you're now pursuing.
I think that's been really the biggest gift in making this work. It's twofold, two gifts. One is that I am incorporating all of the things that I feel that I am and that has been my history. I'm calling it a personal narrative, dance, theater, opera, comic drama.
That's great.
And it does come from a dancer's sensibility in terms of not being a linear play, but it's made up of lists and text that I've written over the course of 2 years or so, having to do with my parents and how the older I get, the more I see that I have become them. And my father passed a little more than 5 years ago. My mother passed 2.5 years ago. And the genesis was that my sisters and I had to write an obituary, first for my father. And we were having a memorial celebration. And I started to make a list of all the things that he did in his life and the things that he was. And it was just a revelation. I mean, I knew all of these things, but to write them down and to see, going from World War II veteran at Battle of the Bulge to peace activist, to ACLU chair on Long Island, to tennis player for 60 years, fisherman for 40 years, book club discussion for 30 years. It just was amazing. And because of the offer from United Solo to make a work, I said to them last year when they invited me, I said, well, I love the invitation, but I don't make solo work anymore. I do company dances. And then they said, well, really think about it. And I really thought about it. And I said, this is the perfect time for me to take these litanies and make a theater dance piece out of them.
That's amazing, just to learn the trajectory of all of that.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
I'm curious, here you have written down in the description of your show that it's about a daughter becoming her late parents. And I'm curious if you could tell us why write about this specific topic.
I think it's amazingly universal, actually, even though it may be specifically about my own trajectory and my own family and my history. We all came from somewhere. We all came from parents, whether you knew your parents or not, whether you had your parents in your life for a long time or a short time. And I was noticing that when I would think about it, I would go back when I was younger. I always thought of myself as my father's daughter. I had his sense of humor, his sarcasm, his impatience, and a certain kind of intellect. And then as I got older, I saw, like just physically, that I was turning into my mother in the second half of my life. And I wake up in the morning and I can see it. I can see it in the mirror. Yeah. And so I've just sort of taken her on in ways that I wasn't aware of when I was younger, physically, emotionally, sensitivity-wise. But I think that, and that's what the piece sort of plays with and discovers. But I think really everyone could do this. Everybody could make their litanies, actually, and their lists. When I've mentioned it to some other colleagues and friends, they say, oh, I don't want to, I hope I'm nothing like my father, things like that. And I'm taken aback and I say, I understand that, depends upon what kind of relationship you had with your parents. I fortunately had just an amazing, loving relationship with both of them my whole life, and my sisters as well. So it was from a place of love that I was able to take both of them on, seeing their foibles and their contentious, bickering relationship sometimes between the two of them. And I just took all of this on, thinking about how we, our DNA, yeah.
And with regards to performing this in front of an audience, after you perform this 45-minute piece, what do you want the audience to leave the theater feeling or thinking?
That's always an interesting question, because I think as artists, I'm trying not to concern myself too much with what I want an audience to think and feel, especially I think from a dance background. We tend to think kind of poetically, I would say, and movement is essentially abstract, but when you put it into a human body, it takes on a certain kind of embodied understanding of a quality or a gesture. But I'm trying to keep this piece in that kind of balance between literal ideas and text and a kind of poetic narrative. So I don't know what the audience should take away, but I can tell you from having shown it to a few people in its genesis, as it was developing, bringing different people in to help me, to coach me, to tell me what they saw. Another young person came in who was a photographer. I'd never met her. She was from Italy. She came in with a colleague, and she was taking photos. And in the middle of the piece, I saw that she had stopped taking photos while I was rehearsing. And so at the end, I went over and I said, what happened? You stopped photographing? And she was in tears. Wow. She was like nearly hysterical, crying. And she's only 25. And I said, have you lost a parent? You lost your parents? She said, no. It just made me want to call up my father right now, talk to him in Italy. So, yeah. I also want to say that the first half of the piece has a lot of funny things.
Oh, great,
yeah.
Great.
It has some real comic craziness as well, which, families have, for sure.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Janis, thank you so much for coming here today to interview with All About Solo. If you're interested in seeing Janis's show and everything that it has to offer, it's being performed in this year's 2018 United Solo Theater Festival on October 4th and October 11th, although I believe October 4th is sold out, or
No,
October 11th?
October 11th.
October 11th is sold out, and there's only a limited amount of tickets left for October 4th, so be sure to snag the tickets soon. And thank you so much for joining us today with All About Solo.
Thank you.